This story begins in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the streets are lined with tall maples, and the hum of daily life rarely breaks the calm. I've always chosen to live in places like this, places where neighbors nod politely but keep to themselves, where the most exciting event might be a stray dog wandering through the cul-de-sac. I live alone in a modest apartment complex tucked between a small park and a row of local shops. It's nothing fancy, but it suits me perfectly. I'm the kind of person who values solitude, who finds comfort in the steady rhythm of routine, and the privacy that comes with living alone. My apartment isn't large, it's a one-bedroom unit with a small kitchen and a balcony that overlooks a patch of green. It's enough room for me and my few belongings, and the quiet that wraps around this place feels like a protective blanket. Most evenings, I come home from work, make a simple dinner, and read or watch something on TV before heading to bed. It's a peaceful existence, and I've grown to appreciate the predictability. On weekends, I often take long walks through the neighborhood or spend time in the park nearby, where the air is thick with the scent of pine and freshly cut grass. Sometimes, I'll sit on a bench with a book, but more often than not, I just watch the world go by, feeling like a small, unnoticed part of a much bigger picture. I've always preferred it this way, quiet, orderly, and just a little removed from the chaos that seems to grip so many other lives. The apartment complex itself is unremarkable, a cluster of identical buildings painted in soft beige, with faded flower beds out front and a few benches scattered around. The neighbors are friendly enough in passing but tend to keep their distance, leaving me with a sense of peaceful anonymity. I like that. No one asks questions, no one drops by unannounced. It's a place where you can disappear into your own world if you want to. My building is 3 stories tall, and I live on the 2nd floor. The hallway outside my door always smells faintly of cleaning products mixed with the distant aroma of coffee from the cafe downstairs. The layout is compact but efficient. My front door opens into a small foyer that leads straight into the living room, with the kitchen on one side and the bedroom down a short hallway. I've personalized the space with a few plants and framed photos of places I've traveled, but otherwise, I keep things simple. One of the things I've always appreciated about this apartment is the sense of safety it offers. The locks are sturdy, and the building has a secure entry system requiring a key fob. I rarely hear any noise from neighbors, and the street outside stays quiet well into the night. It's the kind of place where you can leave your front door unlocked in the summer and still feel secure. It's that sense of calm and normalcy that has kept me here for years. I work from home, which adds another layer to the quiet routine. My job involves a lot of writing and research, so my days are spent mostly inside, with the occasional break for coffee or a walk. The isolation suits me, it's a good fit for my personality. I'm not particularly social, and I don't crave constant interaction. Instead, I thrive on solitude and the control it gives me over my environment. Despite this, I'm not completely disconnected from the outside world. I have a small circle of friends I keep in touch with online, and I meet a few people occasionally for dinner or a movie. But those interactions are planned and limited, and I always look forward to returning to the peacefulness of my own space. It's a delicate balance, and so far, it has worked well. That sense of order and safety is something I've taken for granted, until the night everything subtly shifted. It wasn't something dramatic or immediately alarming, but rather a series of small, almost imperceptible changes that slowly chipped away at my feeling of security. The kind of changes that make you question whether you're just being paranoid, or if something more sinister is at play. It started one evening, when I returned home later than usual after a long day of work. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the apartment complex was bathed in the soft glow of street lamps. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, feeling the familiar warmth of my little sanctuary. Everything looked normal at first glance, the furniture was in place, the kitchen counters were clean, and the soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. But then I noticed something slightly off. The mail I had left on the kitchen table was shifted, just a little to the right, as if someone had moved it while I was away. It was such a small detail that I almost dismissed it, blaming myself for not paying attention earlier. Still, the feeling lingered. I set my bags down and checked the locks on the door again, running my hand over the sturdy deadbolt to reassure myself. I moved through the apartment, flicking on lights and peering into rooms. My bedroom looked untouched, the bed neatly made as I had left it. The bathroom was just as I'd left it that morning. Yet, the niggling sensation that something was out of place refused to go away. I found myself double-checking drawers and cabinets, wondering if anything else had been disturbed. The next morning, I woke up early and went about my routine, but the unease from the night before clung to me. I noticed the plant on the windowsill had a few leaves bent awkwardly, as if someone had brushed past it. My laptop on the desk was exactly where I left it, but the chair was slightly pushed back, not quite aligned with the desk. These subtle shifts unsettled me more than I expected. I tried to rationalize everything. Maybe I'd been tired and careless. Maybe the breeze from the open balcony door had moved some things. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. That the quiet solitude I'd cherished might have been invaded by an unseen presence. As the day wore on, I found myself glancing nervously toward the door, half expecting to see someone standing there. The neighborhood outside remained calm and familiar, but inside, the stillness felt charged with an unspoken tension. I kept my phone close, just in case, and made a mental note to be more vigilant. That night, as I lay in bed, I listened intently for any unusual sounds, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of fabric, anything that might confirm my suspicions. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Yet the silence felt heavier somehow, as if it was concealing something just out of reach. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was overreacting. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew quietly in the shadows of my mind. The safe, predictable world I'd built around me was starting to feel fragile, like glass ready to shatter with the slightest touch. And so, the story begins here, in a place that seemed ordinary and secure, where a person who valued peace and privacy suddenly found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about safety and solitude. The calm before the storm, the stillness before the unsettling truth revealed itself. In the days that followed, the uneasy feeling I'd first noticed began to grow, creeping into every corner of my life like a shadow I couldn't shake. At first, it was small things, little signs that something was off, subtle enough to be dismissed but persistent enough to gnaw at my nerves. It started to feel like my apartment was no longer exclusively mine, that an unseen guest had slipped inside without permission. The morning after I discovered the shifted mail and bent leaves, I woke up early, determined to convince myself I was imagining things. I went through my usual routine, making coffee, checking emails, tidying up. But even as I moved around the apartment, I found myself scanning the rooms with a heightened sense of alertness. Each glance seemed to reveal tiny changes, like a puzzle missing pieces I hadn't noticed before. One afternoon, I returned from a quick trip to the grocery store to find the living room lamp tilted slightly, its shade askew. I was sure I'd left it perfectly straight. I adjusted it and moved on, trying not to let the irritation creep in, but my mind raced with questions. Had someone been here while I was gone? No signs of forced entry or damage, but these small disturbances suggested otherwise. That night, as I prepared to wind down, I double-checked the locks on all the doors and windows. The front door's deadbolt felt secure, the chain lock in place, and the bedroom window latch tight. I even tested the security alarm, pressing the buttons carefully until I was sure it was armed. Still, the sense of unease lingered, like a whisper just beyond hearing. Sleep was elusive. I lay awake, listening for sounds, footsteps, voices, anything. The apartment remained silent, but my imagination filled the quiet with shadows. I found myself glancing toward the door every few minutes, heart pounding, convinced I heard the faintest creak of a floorboard or the softest whisper outside. But when I looked, there was nothing. The next afternoon, while working at my desk, I noticed something else. My favorite mug, which I always keep on the kitchen counter, was moved to the edge, precariously close to falling. I hadn't touched it since the morning. The thought that someone might have entered and casually moved things around, as if testing boundaries, made my skin crawl. I considered calling the building manager or the police, but without concrete proof, I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if these were just forgetful moments, a result of stress or fatigue? I told myself to stay calm and observe, to look for patterns or more obvious signs. One evening, I decided to stay up late, sitting quietly in the living room with the lights turned low. I wanted to see if I could catch any unusual activity. At first, nothing happened. The apartment remained still, bathed in the soft glow of the street lamp filtering through the curtains. But then, just past midnight, I heard it, a faint rustling sound coming from the hallway outside my door. My heart leapt into my throat. I froze, straining to listen. The rustling continued, soft and deliberate, like someone rifling through papers or small objects. I checked the door. The chain lock was still fastened, but the noise was unmistakable. Someone was there, just beyond the threshold. I debated what to do. Should I call the police? Should I confront whoever it was? Fear and adrenaline battled inside me. I grabbed my phone, thumb hovering over the emergency number, but hesitated. Instead, I dialed a close friend, whispering the situation while keeping the phone out of view. The rustling stopped abruptly, replaced by a faint tapping sound, like fingertips lightly drumming against the door. Then silence. I held my breath, waiting for movement, but none came. After several minutes, I slowly unlatched the chain and cracked the door open, peering out into the dark hallway. It was empty. I stepped into the corridor, the silence pressing in around me. The walls were the same dull beige, the carpeted floor soft beneath my feet. No sign of anyone. But then I noticed something odd. The door to the apartment directly across from mine was slightly ajar. I hadn't seen that before. I crept closer and gently pushed it open. The apartment was dark and quiet, but the faint light from the hallway revealed a mess. Drawers were pulled out, their contents scattered on the floor. Furniture was shifted and papers littered the floor. It looked as if someone had been searching for something in a hurry. I called the building manager immediately, who promised to send someone over and inform the police. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived, flashing their badges and asking me questions. I explained the noises I'd heard, the signs of intrusion, and the state of the neighboring apartment. They took notes and reassured me they'd investigate. That night, I barely slept. The knowledge that someone had been in my building, rummaging through a neighbor's private space, made my apartment feel vulnerable. I kept my phone close, my doors locked, and my senses alert. But the next morning brought a new and unsettling discovery. As I opened my front door to step outside, I noticed the doormat was flipped over. It was a small detail, but it struck me as deliberate. Later inside my apartment, I found a faint, almost imperceptible smudge on the kitchen counter, like a fingerprint wiped hastily but not completely erased. I hadn't seen it before, and I was sure I hadn't left it there. I began to question everything. Had the intruder entered my apartment as well? Had they been watching me? The thought was terrifying. Someone who had breached the neighbor's space could just as easily have crossed into mine. The safe bubble I'd lived in for so long was punctured, and the air was thick with suspicion. I installed a few inexpensive motion sensor lights near my door and hallway, hoping the added illumination would deter any further attempts. I also reached out to a local locksmith to discuss changing the locks, even though I had no reason to believe my keys were compromised. It was a precaution, a way to reclaim some control over the situation. Despite these measures, the feeling of being watched persisted. Small things continued to shift, my books slightly out of order, a chair moved from its usual spot, the faintest trace of footsteps on the balcony tiles in the morning dew. Each incident was minor on its own, but added to a growing tapestry of unease. I started to avoid spending time alone in the apartment after dark, preferring instead to sit in the cafe downstairs or take long walks until late, hoping the presence I sensed would stay away. But no matter where I went, the anxiety followed me, like a shadow clinging to my heels. One night, as I returned home, I noticed the building's security cameras had been malfunctioning for the past few days. The manager explained it was a technical issue, but the timing felt suspicious. If someone was deliberately disabling surveillance, it meant they intended to operate unseen. I began documenting everything, times, dates, descriptions, trying to piece together a pattern. I even started keeping a small flashlight and pepper spray beside my bed, just in case. The life I'd built around quiet solitude was unraveling, and I was left wondering how far this intrusion would go. The most unnerving part was the silence from the neighbor whose apartment had been ransacked. I never saw them again after that night. It was as if they had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the chaos in their home, and the lingering questions about what had drawn the intruder there in the first place. Each day, the line between paranoia and reality blurred. I wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding, that I was overreacting to normal quirks of apartment living. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong. Someone had crossed into my space, and the consequences were only just beginning to surface. As I sat alone in my dimly lit living room one evening, the city quiet around me, I realized the sense of security I'd once taken for granted was slipping away. The apartment that had been my sanctuary now felt like a trap, each creak and shadow a reminder that I might not be as safe as I thought. And that knowledge was more frightening than anything else. The night the full weight of intrusion truly hit me began like any other, but it ended with a shattering of the fragile sense of safety I'd clung to. I was lying in bed, the low hum of the air conditioner the only sound, when I heard it, faint footsteps just outside my bedroom door. At first, I thought I was imagining things. My mind, on edge from days of unease, was conjuring sounds that weren't there. But then the footsteps came again, soft, deliberate, paced slowly as if someone was testing the floorboards. I held my breath, heart pounding, listening intently. The door was firmly locked from my side, and the chain was latched, but that didn't stop the footsteps from moving just beyond. I strained my ears and caught another sound, a whisper, barely audible, like someone muttering to themselves. I didn't recognize the words, but the tone was unsettling, low and urgent. My first instinct was to stay hidden. I reached for my phone, fingers trembling as I dialed 911, keeping the call on speaker. The operator's calm voice was a lifeline as I whispered my address and explained the situation. She told me to stay quiet and not confront whoever was there. But fear morphed quickly into a fierce resolve. I wasn't about to be a passive victim. Grabbing the baseball but I kept near the bed, a relic from my brief stint playing softball in college, I crept toward the door. Each step was deliberate and slow, trying not to betray my position. As I approached, the footsteps stopped. The silence was deafening. I slowly unlatched the chain and opened the door just a crack, swinging the bat back in my hand. The hallway outside was empty, but then I caught a glimpse of movement near the living room. I moved cautiously, bat raised, and as I rounded the corner, I saw a shadow slip behind the couch. My voice shook as I called out, "Who's there? Get out of my apartment." There was no response, only the scrape of furniture and hurried footsteps retreating towards the front door. I lunged forward, swinging the bat, connecting with a heavy thud against something or someone. The intruder stumbled but regained balance and tackled me to the floor. The struggle was fierce and chaotic. My attacker's hands wrapped around my throat, squeezing with terrifying strength. I gasped, clawed at his grip, my vision blurring as panic surged. Just as I felt myself losing consciousness, the distant wail of sirens pierced the night. The sound seemed to break the spell. The intruder released me and bolted out the door, slamming it behind him. I lay gasping on the floor, hands shaking, struggling to catch my breath. Moments later, police officers burst into the apartment, flashlights sweeping the rooms and weapons drawn. They found no sign of the intruder, who'd escaped into the night, but their presence was a balm to my rattled nerves. One officer knelt beside me, asking if I was hurt. I shook my head, still too stunned to speak. He told me they would increase patrols in the area, and encouraged me to install additional security measures. The adrenaline from the encounter kept me awake for hours. I sat on the couch, bat still in hand, replaying every second in my mind. How had the intruder gotten in? There was no forced entry, no broken locks or windows. Had they had a key? The thought sent a new wave of fear through me. In the days that followed, I combed through every corner of my apartment, searching for clues. Nothing obvious stood out, but the feeling of violation lingered like a dark cloud. I realized that the intruder must have had intimate knowledge of my routines and the layout of my home. The police investigation yielded little. Neighbors reported no suspicious activity, and surveillance footage from the building's exterior cameras was inconclusive, plagued by technical glitches that had started weeks earlier. It was as if the intruder had planned meticulously, exploiting weaknesses I hadn't even known existed. I tried to return to normalcy, but the apartment felt alien now, every creak and shadow a potential threat. Sleep was elusive. I kept lights on through the night, and installed additional locks and a security alarm system. Yet, despite these precautions, the fear persisted. The most haunting aspect was the knowledge that someone had been inside my home, moving freely while I slept mere rooms away. The boundaries I'd taken for granted had been shattered, replaced by a pervasive sense of vulnerability. I confided in a close friend, who urged me to consider staying elsewhere for a while. But leaving felt like admitting defeat, surrendering my sanctuary to an unknown menace. I resolved instead to reclaim my space, to confront the fear with vigilance and strength. Weeks later, I received a call from the police. They'd apprehended a suspect in a nearby burglary ring, but there was no evidence linking him directly to my case. The mystery remained unsolved, the intruder's identity and motives unknown. Despite the uncertainty, I found a small measure of comfort in the increased patrols and the support of friends. Still, the experience left me changed, a person more aware of the fragile line between safety and danger. My apartment, once a haven of peace, had become a place marked by intrusion and mystery. And though I tried to move forward, the memory of that night lingered, a reminder that the quietest places can hide the darkest threats. After the terrifying encounter, I knew I couldn't just wait and hope the intruder wouldn't come back. The sense of safety I once took for granted was shattered, and the idea of someone lurking around my home, watching, waiting, was unbearable. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I bought a small, discreet security camera that could be placed near the entrance of my apartment. It was nothing fancy, just a simple motion-activated device with night vision, but it gave me a sliver of control in a situation that felt completely out of my hands. I installed it by the front door, angling it so that it would capture anyone approaching or lingering nearby. The first few nights, the footage showed nothing unusual, just the occasional neighbor coming or going, a stray cat prowling the bushes, the reflection of headlights from passing cars. Each morning, I'd check the recordings with a mixture of hope and dread, scanning for any sign of the intruder or someone suspicious. Then, one night, the camera captured something unsettling. I was sitting in the living room, trying to distract myself with a book, when my phone buzzed with a notification. I opened the app to view the footage, and saw a shadowy figure standing just outside my door. The image was grainy, but the shape was unmistakable, a person, motionless, watching the entrance. The figure lingered for several minutes, as if waiting for something, then disappeared down the hallway. My heart pounded as I replayed the clip. Who was this? Why were they here again? And how long had they been watching me? Fear and frustration mingled inside me. I debated calling the police immediately, but without knowing who the person was or what they intended, I worried it might be dismissed as a false alarm. Instead, I resolved to keep the camera running and stay vigilant. The nights that followed were tense. The footage showed more instances of the shadowy figure appearing, sometimes pacing back and forth, sometimes lingering silently. Each time, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, the feeling of being watched growing into something suffocating. One evening, as I sat near the window, I heard a faint knock at the door. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't recognize the sound, too soft to be a neighbor, too deliberate to be accidental. I didn't answer. The knocking stopped after a moment, but the unease it stirred remained. I called a trusted friend and asked if they could stay with me for a few nights. Having someone else in the apartment felt like a shield against the unknown, a reminder that I wasn't completely alone in this. Their presence eased my anxiety somewhat, but the shadow of the intruder lingered. The most unsettling moment came one night when the figure didn't just linger outside the door but actually stepped inside. I was dozing on the couch when I heard the unmistakable sound of the front door opening slowly. My pulse quickened as I sat up, eyes straining in the darkness. The camera I'd set up caught the movement, a dark silhouette slipping inside, moving silently through the apartment. I grabbed my phone and whispered to my friend, who was in the bedroom, to call 911. The intruder moved cautiously, almost as if searching for something, their footsteps muffled on the carpet. I stayed as quiet as possible, heart thudding in my chest. Suddenly, the figure stopped near the kitchen. I could just make out the outline of a person, tall, wearing a hooded jacket. I gripped the baseball bat I'd kept nearby since the last attack, ready to defend myself if necessary. Then, unexpectedly, the intruder turned toward me. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and in that instant, I saw something unsettling, a cold, detached stare, as if they were more curious than hostile. Before I could react, the intruder bolted, disappearing out the front door. The police arrived moments later, alerted by my friend's call, but the intruder was gone. In the aftermath, the officers reviewed the security footage and took statements, but with no concrete evidence or identification, their hands were tied. They increased patrols around the building and suggested I consider additional security measures. I upgraded my locks, installed a door jammer, and added more cameras inside the apartment. I also invested in a panic alarm that could be triggered silently in an emergency. Each new layer of security brought a small sense of relief, but the fear remained. I wrestled with whether to involve the police further or try to handle the situation myself. The idea of confronting the intruder terrified me, but so did the thought of living under constant threat. I began researching self-defense classes and spoke with neighbors about their experiences. Despite all precautions, the psychological toll was immense. I found myself jumping at noises, double-checking doors multiple times a night, and hesitating before opening the door even to familiar faces. The apartment that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a cage. The presence of the intruder, their knowledge of my routines, and their ability to enter and exit unseen suggested a deeper obsession. It wasn't random, it was calculated. This realization was chilling. I started keeping a journal, documenting every incident, every odd sound, every fleeting shadow. It was a way to maintain control, to piece together a narrative from the fragments of fear and uncertainty. Friends urged me to move, to leave the apartment behind and start fresh elsewhere. But the thought of abandoning my home, my life, was heartbreaking. I wanted to reclaim my space, to prove that fear wouldn't dictate my life. One night, as I reviewed the latest footage, I noticed something new. A small, folded piece of paper slipped under my door. My hands trembled as I picked it up and unfolded it. The note was brief, but its message was clear and chilling. I'm closer than you think. A cold wave washed over me. The intruder wasn't just outside anymore, they were inside my world, within arm's reach. The following days were a blur of heightened anxiety and sleepless nights. I moved furniture to block entrances, changed my routines, and avoided being alone whenever possible. Yet, despite all efforts, the feeling of being watched grew heavier. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer, every sound sharper. The intruder had crossed the boundary from observer to invader, and the question that haunted me was not if they would return, but when. I was caught in a relentless, invisible confrontation, trapped between the need for safety and the terror of the unknown, struggling to hold onto my life as it unraveled around me. In the days after the note appeared beneath my door, the atmosphere in my apartment shifted palpably. The chilling message wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration that the intruder's obsession was deeper than I had imagined. It felt as if I was being stalked by a presence that knew my every move, my every quiet moment, and was deliberately toying with me. Despite the fear swelling inside, I tried to hold myself together. I installed additional locks on the windows and doors, and hired a professional security consultant to review my setup. Cameras were repositioned, motion sensors added, and an alarm system installed that could alert the police directly. But even these tangible precautions did little to quell the gnawing anxiety. Each night, I checked the perimeter footage obsessively, scanning for any hint of movement. The shadowy figure I'd seen before appeared sporadically, sometimes just outside my door, sometimes pacing the hallway. Watching the same footage over and over, I noticed subtle details, how the intruder would linger near my door, occasionally glancing down, as if waiting for a signal or a response. The police remained involved, but the lack of concrete evidence hampered their investigation. No fingerprints, no DNA, no clear image of the intruder's face. It was as though this person had mastered the art of invisibility within my world, slipping in and out without leaving a trace. One afternoon, I found a small bundle tucked behind the flower pot on my balcony. Inside was a collection of personal items, photos of me taken from a distance, a crumpled map of the neighborhood marked with my usual walking routes, and a notebook filled with pages of handwritten notes. The handwriting was neat but unsettling, filled with observations about my habits, my movements, even my moods. I called the police immediately, handing over the items as evidence. The discovery confirmed my worst fears. This was no random trespasser. It was someone fixated on me, someone who had been watching me closely for weeks, if not months. The police increased patrols and promised to step up efforts, but I knew the real danger wasn't just physical intrusion, it was the psychological torment, the feeling of being scrutinized, hunted, and invaded on the most intimate level. I started avoiding going out alone, canceling plans with friends and family. The apartment became my fortress and my prison. Every knock, every unexpected sound triggered a surge of panic. I couldn't shake the sensation that eyes were on me, watching from the shadows. Then, one evening, the intruder crossed a line that made the situation undeniable. I returned home to find the front door unlocked. Not just ajar but wide open. My heart stopped. Inside, the apartment was disturbed, drawers pulled open, papers scattered, but nothing of obvious value taken. Instead, the intruder had rifled through my private things, leaving behind a message scrawled on the bathroom mirror, "You can't hide." The sight was terrifying and intimate, a direct violation of my sanctuary. It was clear that the intruder wanted to send a message, asserting control over a space that was supposed to be mine alone. I called the police immediately. This time, they took the break-in very seriously, increasing their presence and suggesting I consider relocating temporarily. But the thought of leaving my home, the place I had fought so hard to protect, felt like surrender. In the days that followed, I installed additional security cameras inside the apartment, covering every entrance and common area. I also invested in smart locks, which allowed me to monitor and control access remotely. For a while, these measures provided a semblance of safety. Yet, despite the physical barriers, the psychological impact deepened. I found myself jumping at every sound, double-checking locks multiple times a day, and struggling with insomnia. The feeling of being watched was no longer just a fear, it had become a constant presence, shadowing my every move. One night, while reviewing the security footage, I noticed something even more disturbing. The intruder had somehow managed to get inside the apartment again, this time, lingering in the hallway, close to the bedroom door. The image was grainy, but the posture and movements were unmistakable. The person lingered for several minutes before slipping away. It was a chilling confirmation that no amount of locks or cameras could fully protect me. The intruder had access, knowledge, and an unsettling persistence. I confided in a close friend, who urged me to consider moving out, at least temporarily. The idea of abandoning my home was distressing, but the alternative, living in constant fear, was unbearable. I began searching for a new place, hoping a fresh start might break the cycle. At the same time, I sought therapy to cope with the anxiety and trauma. The emotional toll was heavy, the intrusion into my life had fractured my sense of security and trust. Nightmares plagued me, and the line between reality and paranoia blurred. Through therapy, I learned to set small boundaries and rebuild a sense of control. I practiced grounding techniques, mindfulness, and strategies to manage the overwhelming fear. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been lost. Meanwhile, the police continued their investigation, but the intruder remained elusive. The neighborhood watch was alerted, and neighbors became more vigilant. Some offered support, while others kept their distance, unsure of what to say or do. Despite the fear and uncertainty, I refused to let the intruder define my life. I adapted, fortified my home, sought support, and planned for a future where I could feel safe again. Still, the knowledge that someone had been inside my home, had violated my privacy, and was watching from the shadows was a haunting reality. The experience left scars, both visible and hidden, and a lingering question about who this person was, and why they targeted me. I often wondered if the intruder was someone I knew, or a stranger driven by obsession. The notebook with its detailed observations suggested familiarity, or at least a deep, disturbing interest. But the mystery remained unsolved. The intruder had become a ghost in my life, present, yet unseen, threatening, yet intangible. And while I worked to rebuild my sense of safety, I knew that some wounds take longer to heal than others. Days after the break-in, and the chilling message left on my bathroom mirror, the creeping dread in my apartment deepened. I thought I had reached the worst of it, but then something new happened, something that confirmed the intruder's presence was not just physical but psychological, and terrifyingly intimate. One afternoon, I found a small envelope slipped quietly under my door. I hadn't heard anyone arrive or leave, which made the act feel even more invasive. With trembling hands, I picked it up and unfolded the note inside. The handwriting was neat but unfamiliar. The message was brief yet loaded with menace. "I know where you sleep." My heart pounded as I read and reread those words. It was impossible to tell if the intruder was taunting me or warning me. Either way, it confirmed that this person was close, too close, and knew details about my life that no stranger should. The note unsettled me more than any forced entry or shadowy figure caught on camera. It wasn't just about trespassing anymore, it was about control, observation, and an invasion of privacy on a deeply personal level. I debated whether to alert the police immediately but knew that without concrete evidence, the note alone might not spur significant action. Instead, I took photos of the letter and stored it safely. I also shared it with a trusted friend, whose support was crucial during those days of escalating fear. The next few nights were filled with restless sleep and constant vigilance. I kept my phone beside me, flashlight within reach, and the security system armed at all times. Despite these precautions, the feeling of being watched intensified. Every creak, every unexpected sound triggered a wave of panic. In response, I began adjusting my routines drastically. I stopped leaving the balcony door open, even on warm nights. I changed my walking routes, varied the times I left and returned home, and avoided going out alone whenever possible. It felt exhausting but necessary. One evening, as I returned from a late dinner with my friend, I noticed a small package on the doorstep, no name, no return address. Inside was a USB drive. My hand shook as I plugged it into my laptop, unsure of what I might find. The files contained a series of photos, some taken from outside my apartment window, showing me through the curtains. Others were more disturbing, showing personal items from inside my home, neatly arranged on my living room floor. There were also videos, grainy and dimly lit, capturing me at various moments, walking to the door, sitting at my desk, and even sleeping. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The intruder had been inside my home multiple times, observing and recording me without my knowledge. It was an invasion so profound it felt like a violation of not just my space, but my very self. I immediately contacted the police and shared the contents of the drive. They promised to increase their efforts but warned that tracking down someone so careful and elusive could take time. Still, the evidence was undeniable, a chilling confirmation that the threat was real and ongoing. In the days that followed, I became hyper-aware of my surroundings. I installed additional cameras covering every angle inside and outside my apartment. I changed the locks again, this time to smart locks with biometric features, hoping to cut off any unauthorized access. Despite these measures, the psychological impact was overwhelming. I struggled to focus at work, my mind constantly drifting back to the images and videos. The sense of safety I had once felt within my own home was shattered. I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, meeting friends, running errands, attending therapy, but always with a lingering shadow of fear. Every unexpected noise or unfamiliar face sent my heart racing. One afternoon, a message appeared on my answering machine. The voice was distorted but unmistakably close. "You can't hide. I'm watching. Always." I froze, the message replaying in my mind long after the call ended. The intruder was no longer content with silent observation. They wanted me to know I was being watched, to live with the constant fear of their presence. I shared the recording with the police, who increased patrols around the building and advised me on safety protocols. I also spoke openly with my neighbors, warning them to be vigilant and offering to share footage if they noticed anything unusual. Despite the support, I felt increasingly isolated. The intruder's knowledge of my routines, my home, even the details of my life I hadn't shared publicly, suggested someone close, perhaps a former acquaintance or a neighbor. I began to scrutinize past interactions, trying to recall anyone who might have shown unusual interest or behaved oddly. But no clear suspect emerged. Everyone seemed ordinary on the surface, and yet I knew appearances could be deceiving. The paranoia crept deeper. I found myself watching windows, noting who entered and left the building, and questioning every unfamiliar face. It was exhausting and lonely, a constant mental battle. One evening, as I returned home, I noticed the elevator lights flickering. When the doors opened, I saw a man standing just inside the lobby, a stranger with an unsettling gaze. He smiled faintly and said, "You shouldn't be afraid. I'm just here to help." My skin crawled. I stepped back, clutching my keys like a weapon. The man's knowledge of my presence was too precise, his words too cryptic. I hurried to the stairs instead, my mind racing. The incident was reported to the police, but the man vanished before officers arrived. Neighbors reported no sign of him earlier that day, deepening the mystery. The line between safety and danger blurred further. I realized that the intruder's obsession had evolved from distant watching to direct interaction, a psychological game designed to unsettle and control. I sought therapy to cope with the trauma, learning to manage the fear and reclaim some sense of normalcy. It was a slow process, filled with setbacks and small victories. Yet the knowledge that someone was so intimately entwined in my life, watching, waiting, and intruding, left an indelible mark. The invasion was not just physical but emotional, a relentless siege on my peace of mind. As I navigated this unsettling reality, I knew one thing for certain: the intruder's presence was no longer a shadow at the edge of my life. It was a force that demanded acknowledgement, a haunting reminder that some uninvited guests never truly leave. The mounting evidence and the intruder's increasingly bold actions forced me to confront a terrifying possibility: this wasn't random. Someone I knew, or at least someone who had known me well enough to track my routines and habits, was behind this. The thought settled over me like a heavy fog, clouding every interaction and memory. I began retracing my steps, reviewing every acquaintance, every casual conversation, every neighborly nod. Was it someone from work? A neighbor who'd noticed my patterns? A friend who'd grown too curious? The more I searched, the more I realized how little I truly knew about the people around me. With renewed determination, I started asking questions discreetly. I spoke with neighbors under the guise of casual conversation, probing for information about anyone acting strangely or anyone unfamiliar around the building. Some mentioned a man who'd recently moved in but never seemed to interact with others. Others recalled a stranger loitering nearby at odd hours. I shared the security footage with a colleague who had some experience with digital forensics. Together we enhanced the images, hoping to reveal more details about the shadowy figure who'd invaded my life. The improved footage showed glimpses of a man's face, fleeting but enough to spark a glimmer of recognition. I scoured social media and local community groups, searching for any match to the face in the footage. Days turned into weeks as I pieced together fragments of information, following threads that led to dead ends or conflicting stories. One lead brought me to a former tenant of my building, a man who'd lived there briefly but was said to have left abruptly after complaints about strange behavior. I managed to find an old online profile and discovered unsettling posts filled with obsession and paranoia, some referencing neighbors and personal grievances. Armed with this information, I contacted the police again, sharing my findings and urging them to investigate the man's whereabouts. Unfortunately, he had moved out of state, complicating efforts to track him down. Undeterred, I continued digging into my past interactions, trying to recall any moment that might explain how this person had gained such intimate knowledge. I remembered a brief encounter with a neighbor who'd struck up a conversation weeks before the first incident. At the time, they seemed harmless, even friendly, but now I wondered if it had been a calculated move to gather information. The suspicion weighed heavily on me. I found it difficult to trust anyone, even those closest to me. Friends noticed my growing wariness and urged me to seek professional help, which I did. Therapy sessions became a lifeline, helping me manage the anxiety and rebuild a sense of control. Despite the emotional toll, I refused to let fear dictate my life. I fortified my home further, installed a sophisticated alarm system with remote monitoring, and joined a neighborhood watch group. Sharing my story openly helped build a support network, and neighbors became more vigilant as well. One afternoon, while reviewing neighborhood security footage from a nearby camera, I spotted the man from the enhanced images. He was lurking near the building entrance, watching intently. I alerted the police immediately, who increased patrols and launched a targeted investigation. But even with this progress, the mystery deepened. The man's obsession seemed to extend beyond me. I discovered reports of similar incidents in other neighborhoods, with victims describing eerily similar experiences of being watched and harassed by an elusive figure. The pattern suggested a disturbing fixation, a methodical stalking that left a trail of fear and uncertainty. I wasn't alone in this nightmare, but that offered little comfort. In the meantime, I remained vigilant. I changed my routines constantly, avoided predictable patterns, and installed additional security measures. I learned to recognize the signs of intrusion and to trust my instincts, even when they screamed of danger. The psychological impact was profound. I battled insomnia, anxiety, and moments of profound isolation. Yet, I also discovered resilience I hadn't known I possessed. Small victories, like spending an evening alone without fear or catching a glimpse of the intruder on camera, became milestones in reclaiming my life. I began documenting everything meticulously, creating a timeline of events, recording every suspicious encounter, and maintaining a detailed log for the police. It was a way to impose order on chaos, to fight back with facts and evidence. Despite these efforts, the intruder remained elusive. They adapted, changed tactics, and continued to haunt the edges of my life. The uncertainty was the worst part, the not knowing when or where they might appear next. I found solace in the support of friends and professionals, who reminded me that I wasn't to blame, and that healing was possible. I also connected with others who had endured similar experiences, sharing stories and strategies for coping. Through it all, I held on to hope that one day, the mystery would be solved, the intruder caught, and my life restored to the peaceful existence I once knew. But until then, the presence lingered like a shadow, unseen but felt, a constant reminder that some uninvited guests never truly leave. Years have passed since the first unsettling signs appeared in my quiet apartment, yet the echoes of those experiences still ripple through my life. After moving to a new city, changing my phone number, and installing top-tier security systems, I hoped the nightmare was behind me. But the shadows of those uninvited visits lingered, a haunting reminder that some fears never fully fade. My new home is far from the old neighborhood, a small townhouse nestled in a busy urban area, surrounded by the constant hum of city life. The noise is a stark contrast to the eerie silence that once filled my former apartment. Here, I hope to find anonymity and peace among the crowd, to rebuild the sense of safety I had lost. Despite these efforts, vestiges of fear remained. I kept a watchful eye on my surroundings, scrutinizing every unfamiliar face, every unexplained noise. The paranoia that once threatened to consume me had softened but never completely disappeared. Some nights as I lay in bed, the memories would surface unbidden, the creak of a floorboard, the soft whisper in the dark, and I'd freeze, heart pounding. Therapy helped me process the trauma, teaching me tools to manage anxiety and reclaim control. I built a circle of trusted friends, people who knew my story and offered steadfast support. Their presence was a balm, a reminder that I was not alone. Yet, even with all these safeguards, the past had a way of creeping back in. One evening, as I settled in after a long day, the phone rang. I hesitated before answering, the sound instantly triggering a flood of anxiety. When I finally picked up, a calm voice greeted me, a nurse from a local hospital, informing me that my mother had been admitted after a fall, and that I was needed immediately. Panic surged through me. I rushed to the hospital, heart hammering, only to find no record of my mother's admission. Confused and alarmed, I called her cell, but it went straight to voicemail. When I returned home, the door was ajar, and the interior was ransacked. The thieves hadn't taken valuables or electronics. Instead, sentimental items were missing, family photos, prescription bottles, things with personal significance. The police suggested this was no ordinary burglary. The caller had known intimate details about my mother and me, and the targeted thefts hinted at a more sinister motive. The realization that someone was again invading my life hit me with terrifying clarity. In the following days, I tightened security further, installed new locks, and set up a comprehensive surveillance system. I was vigilant, watching for any sign of the intruder, or someone connected to the strange hospital call. But weeks passed with no incident, and I began to wonder if the nightmare was finally over. Then, one night, a man pounded on my door claiming it was his home. He held what appeared to be a lease agreement and photos showing himself inside the house, photos I had never seen before. He spoke confidently, insisting I was the intruder in his rightful home. I was bewildered and frightened. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the man had disappeared into the night. Following the ordeal, I contacted my landlord, only to learn that the previous tenants had no knowledge of this man. 2 weeks later, I returned home to find the house ransacked again, the damage deeper but without signs of forced entry. The police believed the intruder had a key, or had found another way inside. After this, my landlord changed all locks and reinforced security throughout the building. The police took the case seriously, and I was granted a restraining order. Yet, despite these measures, the sense of invasion persisted. I often wonder about the man who claimed the house as his own, the photos, the lease, the confidence. Was he mentally unstable, or was there a darker purpose behind his actions? The mystery remains unsolved, a chilling puzzle piece in the larger picture of my experiences. Now, as I sit in this safer space, I reflect on how these events reshaped me. The uninvited guest who first entered my life years ago never truly left. The fear, the uncertainty, the violation, they became threads woven into my story. I have learned to live with the vigilance born of those events, balancing caution with the desire for normalcy. Some nights I still lie awake, listening for sounds that aren't there, haunted by the knowledge that some intruders are more than just physical, they are shadows on the mind, persistent and unyielding. And while the police continue their efforts and my support network holds strong, I accept that some uninvited guests never truly leave. They linger in the corners of memory and the quiet spaces of the night, reminding me that safety is a fragile thing, and peace is often hard-won. This is my story, etched with fear and resilience, a testament to the unexpected ways our lives can be invaded, not only by strangers at the door but by the lingering shadows they leave behind.